So it opens up the world of possibilities. If you think about it, what if your average SaaS product is really good at getting you the 80% of the way there, and anyone can get their next 20% of the way there for their company? It changes the physics of SaaS, which is why people are freaked out. They're freaked out because these companies invested extremely heavily in one way of their company working, and now have found out that if they had been 3 years old now, they would have built their company in a completely different way. But if you're a near public or recently public SaaS company, you have invested incredible amounts of money in SaaS working in a certain way, which it may not work that way in the years to come. That's why the industry is freaking out, I think, and the valuations represent that, I think.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. This time, Mark and I sat down with Josh Herzig-Marx and John Cutler, both previous guests on the podcast, for a fascinating conversation about the way that AI is impacting product teams and especially product operations teams. We talked about John's recent experience joining a company called Dotwork as their head of product back in a full-time role after taking some time doing lots of fractional and solopreneurship kind of stuff, and why he's so excited about this new role that he finds himself in. You'll find out it plays perfectly to John's strengths as you get through the conversation, and covered all kinds of interesting ground around the way that AI is being used in this kind of custom solution space where you're trying to build some horizontal platform product that can accommodate so many different use cases, and how to really focus all of your efforts on the go-to-market side at this stage of a company, which is very early, on finding the initial raving customers that will shout off rooftops about your product. I learned a lot from this. I always love listening to John just kind of give you a glimpse into the beautiful mess in his head, and I hope you enjoy it too. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app, follow us on Substack, give us a rating. It'll help us a ton and help future people discover us while also making sure you never miss an episode. Thank you. All right, we're live. The besties are back together.
Great to see everyone.
Yeah, good to see you, Josh. Good to see you, John.
Good to see you all.
I have selfishly been excited about this conversation because I've been dying to know, John, what you've been up to, and you're back in a full-time role. I remember we had a call on one of my dog walks when you were thinking about joining this company, and all the different kind of pros and cons, or just like the things you're thinking about. So what have you been up to? What is this new role? And we could maybe dive a little bit into some of the stuff that we're thinking about that ties to it.
Yeah. So I'm the head of product at a company called Dotwork, a startup. I don't want anyone to use their company yet. And it's just back in crazy startup land. I haven't been in a startup for a while, and that's the most exciting part. On any given day, I'm the head of product marketing, and I'm also a fractional salesperson, and I'm doing the product stuff and cranking out prototypes with Cursor and breaking all the rules of the crap that I talk about every single second, and overselling the product to try to get us deals. And I'm confident that we can make them happy, but vision questing a little bit. And so, back in the thick of it and doing it. So it's fun. Yeah, it's really fun.
Oh, you say
Describe Dotwork really briefly. I know this isn't, you're so nice, you're not going to pitch it, but just for people who don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because the founders sold their prior company to Atlassian, and it became this product called Jira Align, which was, in theory, the enterprise offering for Atlassian. A successful exit for them, but also it was successful for Atlassian, at least for attracting enterprise customers, because it's not traditionally, where do you go for a really big, huge enterprise? What extra stuff do you have to offer them? And so but being in part of that environment, they just saw that there was other opportunities, like unmet needs that were going to be very difficult to meet in that particular setting. And core of them left and started this company. And so basically it's in the area of strategy, deployment, and goal setting, and kind of knowledge sharing in the organization. You could think of everything like above the direct team level, which is often just done in spreadsheets and decks and docs. Something like Jira Product Discovery is something that a team would use for their roadmap to get shit done. And yet there's a whole sort of mess of tools in most companies and things that go on above that level. So you could think of this as kind of a mix of like an ERP product, a BI product, a workflow product. I mean, they have elements of like resource allocation. So there's a finance component to it. There's strategy deployment and alignment, which is maybe more workflow. It's a BI component too, because you sense what's going on in the organization. I'm hesitant to put it in a box at the moment because I think you don't need to force positioning. We talk about that a lot in the company. We have a lot of optionality as a company. There's many different ways we could go. And so one thing that's been kind of fun being in a startup, when I mentioned breaking the rules, is sometimes you realize that optionality is a strategy to do it. So we've been really spending a lot of time on our platform side of it, because often when you build these tools, you reach the point where you can't really build quickly and you can't adapt to customer needs. Like you do the platform stuff later. You do the platform stuff like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years into what you're doing. And then you try to abstract out your product. And because they were sort of in the trenches for a decade, again, breaking the rules, like you're not supposed to start with the platform unless it's like a developer focused tool, but they started with the platform because they knew that was one of the parts. So the way we work right now at Design Partners is crazy. That's what I mean, again, about breaking the rules, is we just literally engage with them almost in a solutions as a service model, where we just want them to have a product, bespoke feeling product that feels like it was built for them, that they can use to get shit done that they need to get done. Sorry, I'm saying cursing a lot, but that's the thing. I'm back in startup land, so that's why I'm cursing a lot, I guess. So we do these things called napkin sprints, where we meet with our customers and they're like, what if we did this? And then our North Star is our ability to be able to realize that in a couple of days with non-regrettable engineering. It's like building on our platform. Can we achieve that use case for them without over complexifying the product or making it something that can't be scaled? And we don't even second guess them. We don't be like, you shouldn't want that or whatever. We just make it happen to do it. So, and the reason why I think it might be interesting for future parts of the conversation is it is incredible what's going on out there. You have product operations teams that have been halved. And a quote from a leader was like, now half my team using Cursor are basically integration engineers. We're building on Stoppa stuff. We're not going to settle with just kind of a bland no-code tool when we could just get what we want. We're running into our own platform problems. Of course, that's where we come in. But the landscape is changing so fast for these types of tools. When I was chatting with someone the other day at a major tech company, and just single-handedly, he built 15 little mini products in the last 30 days that solved like annual planning problems and data plumbing problems and making things possible for people. So there's just crazy stuff happening in the operations space at the moment. And so we're just trying to like be in the mix, but keep a lot of optionality with what we're doing. That's, yeah, again, break the rules and have fun.
It sounds like you're wearing many hats and doing many things.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you do it all, but what have you found to be the highest leverage of, or like the best use of your time in this stage where you have 100 priorities?
Yeah. Selling. Because if you do it right, you learn so much. If you do it wrong, you don't. But going out there and talking to people about the product, and I can't share it, but it's like, I always have this like one Miro board approach where I just keep one Miro board from the day I started a company. It's literally, I think there's like 1,000 frames on it with just notes and mental models and talking to people. And so I think that if you've been doing this for a while, I think that it's so risky to say this, but if you've been in the mix for a long time, you can wear a bit of a researcher hat and a sales hat and a PM hat simultaneously. And I can't switch my camera. I have it on the wall about remind yourself what hat you're wearing, because it's so easy to get your own biases get in the way and you start like going off script and you lose what you're doing. But that's it. Nothing's better than when you're asking someone for $200,000 and then seeing what happens. And it goes like that. So
why do you feel like you're breaking the rules? I feel like everything you're saying sounds like it's, I don't want to say you're running the playbook, because you're obviously doing things that have never been done exactly before, but what about it feels like you're going against?
Oh, I think just the rule, but what I mean is that there's like talk tracks for product, that if you're going to give general product advice, you're not going to say certain things. I'm not going to tell your average PM to go out there and just start selling.
Why?
Because that
Why not?
Well,
Yeah.
I would if I knew they were more experienced, but I'm saying as a dispenser of advice, you're not going to say certain things. An example is this platform first approach. it's even risky for us. It actually messes with your brain because you have to think on like many different levels of abstraction right from the beginning of a startup. That's very dangerous. So if you were a new founder and you gave that advice of, hey, by the way, if in your last company you were building a tool and it felt hard to build it, just go off and start another company and raise $12 million and spend 2 years in stealth building this thing out. It's more of like an advanced play. So I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not saying we're special for doing these things. I'm just noting that it wouldn't match the common advice unless I knew how experienced someone was and how risk friendly they were with what they were doing.
John, I don't want to yuck your yum or anything, but I mean, I'm kind of with Ben. This sounds like there's no such thing as like a vanilla B2B startup, but this sounds a little bit like the vanilla B2B startup, except that maybe they brought on product leadership a little earlier than you might otherwise ask one to. And who was it he had on last week, a couple weeks ago, who's talking about the future of product management is distribution, go to market just being the,
Oh, Phil.
Yeah. Distribution. It sounds like, it sounds a lot like that. And I'm wondering what to you feels different between the classic product management work of discovery and selling. Are you learning different things in there? Are you approaching it differently? Do you have...
Yeah, that's a good, well, having done UX research and met with so many PMs who tried to do it and didn't do it well, I'll try to put like a better pin on it, right? Where if you're doing research, you should be doing structured research to increase certainty around core questions you have, or at least understand where you're going. And so it's a diligent activity that you're doing. And sales is a much more, I joked with someone today that I literally have to put on the hat of the best salesperson I've seen at like an Amplitude. There was salespeople like Daniel Thomas and other ones of those speakers. I swear they could sell me anything. They could just sell me. They would sell me stuff even when they didn't know they were selling me. Like I'd go to the annual company party and they would be like selling me playing the whack-a-mole machine. Like they could sell me anything. And so I think that there is that element of you're doing the research mode. It's about that product managers also doing research, but researching maybe slightly other questions, or they're still doing research. But I think that's like the hat switching. And frankly, to your point, I think founders naturally always fall into this juggling act because they're often putting there as like the key sale. I know that, for example, Spencer at Amplitude probably was always in this thing. So I'm talking about me personally, it feels different, but I'm sure that great founders and other people are having to do this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Mark, you look like you're going to say something.
Josh, you
but
go.
Josh was going to go too.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Mark's tell. He just kind of gently strokes his chin. He's like, okay.
Yeah. But
we all do
I'm going to take it like slightly different direction. So I feel like you wanted to do a follow-up. So you go for it.
I just wanted to propose a difference between the outstanding salespeople at Amplitude who you worked with, who could sell you anything, and maybe your role now and the role of the founder who's doing sales, right? Founder-led sales, is the head of sales at Amplitude should make sure everybody's using Amplitude, right? It's a mature product in a niche that almost every tech and tech-enabled company needs. Anybody can benefit from Amplitude. One of the challenges that you're going to have at .work, especially with your model of working closely with your earliest design partners, is you got to make sure you don't sell it to anybody, right? It's the deals you don't close that are most important, right? You sign the wrong design partner and it's going to if not put you out of business, put you months behind.
That is a huge thing that we think about. In fact, part of this goes too, because having a deep network, creating leads is not the problem. It's actually the problem is, I love that you're pointing this out too, because these are obviously like theoretical things or in the past at companies like clicked in different ways in different stages. But I love that point where the thing that would really kill us is if we just every day, every second is precious. And you really notice that in a huge way. So if I like talking with people, but if I end up, for example, one thing that we've learned, which we could talk about related to other things, is there's sort of 4 hats involved with having a good operating system in your company. One is you need leaders support who actually believe that it's a thing. But not all leaders are nerds about ways of working. In fact, some of the best leaders are they hate it. They just don't want to think about it. So that's the leaders. But then you've got this kind of almost designer or architect of the ways of working who thinks about things like common language and centralization and decentralization and the norms of the company. And that's how I've always personally related as you do. But then you need a builder. If you're going to instrument some of your operating system, you need like a more traditional like ops person. It takes the problem and it makes it happen. And the fourth one is what we call it the wranglers, but you could have the best OS in the team with leadership support and it's well instrumented, but you actually need to do it. You need to take part. So you see this in a lot of companies where a leader comes in, I think I want to work this way. It's super big picture. And then someone else is like, yeah, they do some slides like ways of working or whatever. And then it never happens. Like you never reinforce the behaviors. You never collect the data that you need. You never do what you need to do. So you need all those four hats working in consort to make it happen. So back to the sales thing. And what I would say to startup founders is that like, you need to be so keenly aware of and this is all normal advice, right? This sort of, you need to be so keenly aware of the hat the person is talking to that you're talking to. So I'll be talking to like a builder or an OS designer, but you need to understand super quickly whether there's any leader in the company who cares about this stuff and whether they would be able to make it a reality as they're working on it. And so that's like because you need to just send them along there. When you're doing design partnerships or launch partnerships, it's so much about who you unfortunately turn away. You just don't have any number of minutes and seconds in the day to have all these conversations to be able to do it. So yeah, pretty standard. I'm reiterating the normal startup travails, but it's the fun part.
I'm curious, how do you because it sounds pretty complex to get like basically the lay of the land and like all different pieces and who's wearing all these hats. So I'm curious, like what tactics have you found to be able to quickly understand, okay, here's the landscape.
This is where it helps the like amplitude experience and other things of talking to so many companies, because you can just pattern match so quickly and ask just a small number of questions to understand. My joke, like for example, at Amplitude was if you had an SDR and they saw someone from Citibank that said SVP of product, the SDR would be like, oh my God, today I was talking to the SVP of product at Citibank. Oh my God, they just responded to me on LinkedIn. We're getting a meeting, everyone. And then if you've done this before, you're like, dude, in banks, everyone's an SVP. The SVP, is it a commercial SVP of product or is it like SVP of tech product in this some area within the company? So a lot of the things, that's where like organizational context helps for the type of product you're selling.
Another one is also like at that company, engineering makes all the decision. Product doesn't even have any decision-making power at that company. Yeah.
Or I actually call it, I joke sometimes, I don't want to name the company because it'll make it seem bad for their company. They found out that basically interest in their product was an early indicator that the person was going to lose their job soon. So that basically like anyone who had the time to be thinking about change at that level and was as interested enough in change at that point was probably going to be someone who's going to be identified for layoffs, which is really crazy if you think about it. But that's the importance of knowing the market you're selling to. If you're selling an aspirational change thing targeted at people being frustrated with ways of working in your company, you're going to attract people who are frustrated with their ways in working. And in the current climate, that's going to mean the person who's like the person who has time to jump on a call with someone. Like you want the people who do not have time to jump on a call with you. That's usually a good indicator that they might be trying to like rapidly in the midst of it, trying to solve the problem. So there's all kinds of funny psychology stuff like that, I think.
That's really good advice. I was going to ask if you have any other criteria for just like who you don't want as a customer or any like heuristics for how to decide who is a bad customer at this stage. And then Mark, I can tell you're itching to go somewhere else. We'll go there too if you want, but I'm just super curious to close the thread on this.
Oh, it's all about, could we really, I'm a sucker for stuff like, could we make them awesome? When you're doing design partnerships or you're doing launch partnerships, our North Star is raving fans. And I actually have that as a goal. Like, can we find people who will literally go on LinkedIn and sing our praises about this helping them do? It's as qualitative as that. How many of those humans in the world can we connect with over the next year who are willing to be on a conference stage with me or be on LinkedIn and be willing to take social capital to tell how we changed what they did? And so I think that it's not about vetting good and bad. It's more like, are we good or bad for them in their journey? And can we make them that raving fan? And in a lot of cases, it's about us and it's about our functionality and what we can do right now and not about their org or whatever. So it's as simplistic as it is. I think that's my philosophy for it.
It's the whole like you'd rather have 100 customers who can't live without you and love you than 1,000 customers who just feel meh about you.
Yeah, that's the thing too about money that I realize. I've been thinking a lot about pricing and packaging and money. And I mean, there's types of enterprise software that routinely people drop 7 figures on all the time and go unused, basically. That they don't really extract any of the value that people are expecting out of them. They do that. And there's startups that their reference for value is like, oh, we spend 50K for that and 30K for that. So this can't be much more than 30 or 50K, can it, to be able to do that? But I think that one of the things that comes up is another part of the research thing too, is figuring out if we were to sell to a customer for 40 or 50K and they were happy, we haven't put a lot of pressure on that money. You know what I mean? 50K is the cost of 2 or 3 meetings. And if our product is meant to, like, there are companies spending 10% of their salaries to go to annual planning and quarterly planning. So at a $5 billion company, they're spending, you do the math, of $5 billion of revenue, they're paying 1% of their revenue. Or 2% of their revenue goes to just their planning rituals. If they're spending 20% of their salary, of their revenue on R&D salaries, and then 10% of that's actually it's 2% if it's up at that point. And so the crazy part is that I think part of it, one of the reasons to be in the helping sell your product as well is to get so uncomfortable about the pricing and the money you're asking for, because there's plenty of products that people even give good reviews on G2 or other things like that, that anyone's going to give a good review on a product they're spending 40K a year on that basically might help them a little bit. So there is that element of, you just reminded me of the pricing challenge, how that is actually an early challenge, not so much that you need to nail your pricing and packaging, but even to know the vicinity that you need to be in for this to be successful, and just going to Matt and asking for that and then making that person a raving fan. That's the hard part, right? To do it.
So you have an extra complexity, right? Because you're selling into, it sounds, I don't know for sure, I don't use .work, but it sounds like you're selling into or creating a new category, right? It's easy to sell, not easy, but selling a $100,000 product where they have a line item in their budget, and they've had it for the past couple of years to spend roughly $100,000 on a product. We know who takes care of it. Bob is in charge of that contract. Bob's job is to read the G2 reviews. Bob's job is to take all the meetings with sales reps. Bob's job is to talk to stakeholders and make sure the product is still supporting them. It's hard to say, hey, you're spending $50 million a year on planning meetings. Instead, I want you to spend $1 million a year on technology and $5 million a year on planning meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just making that 50 million go further. Yeah. It's funny when of course I cringe when anyone, I don't know you, Ben, but like when any startup asks for advice and they say, we're creating a new category. I'm like, oh God. I
say be careful.
Yeah.
Tread carefully.
I think that the other part too is that it's, you just got me nervous there, Josh. Like, don't say that part. It's making me really nervous. No. I'm
excited.
I'm
nervous and excited.
It is true. But I actually like how you framed it. I think that's what people forget, is that sometimes people just have trouble selling their product. So they think they need to name it a different way, and they create a new category, and it's really a function of their expansion strategy has just failed. And so you see these, like, I mean, even at Amplitude, I remember one time we called ourselves the digital optimization system. I'm like, who in the world would ever use those words? No one uses those words, but it was because it's like a new class of customers to be able to do that. But I just think that for startups, if the path to success is creating a new category versus hijacking a category or hijacking a spend, you're going to have a really rough road ahead of you. And so part of that thing is like understanding of the research that actually mentioned about the sale things is part of that's like my everyday obsession is like, are we hijacking? Is there a spend here? Or that kind of stuff is an important part, because if you don't nail that question early, you have some trouble, I think.
Yeah. My whole take of like the going after a new category is just like a tactic to raise money and be like, oh, we're going behind like this greenfield opportunity, and there's like an untapped TAM, and there's just this investment of $10 million, could be billions of dollars. I feel like that's just like the easy sell of like, and less competition, and you can tell a story of like, hey, here's how I'm going to win the category. But I think thinking about pricing and packaging, I think that's one of the parts that I get excited about AI that I think it's almost obviously I think that this price per seat or usage base and pricing and packaging doesn't make sense for everything. And it's exciting to see, for example, like now, like some companies moving to like outcome-based pricing, or even like thinking about, hey, like this, like for example, I think like Devin, or even I'm sure maybe some tools like Coursera might move to that. Say, hey, maybe we're replacing an engineer, and that's how we're pricing, right, our products. So I think it's cool that you're starting to think about that as well, and not necessarily like just charging per seat, but also be like, hey, like here's how much we're basically replacing X amount of meetings that in theory would be this expense. X would cost them X amount of dollars. So I think it's a really creative way to think about it.
Powerful thing. Yeah. The one thing that comes to mind, just as you're saying, is I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs and technology people who are missing out on just incredibly successful bootstrap possibilities out there, which are basically like a very lightweight consultancy that also uses tools that gives solutions. And I'll give you an example how the difference is in money when you think about it. Like the amounts of money that people spend, McKinsey and all that kind of stuff, in the tens of millions of dollars to do some transformation to get what they want, to get the solution of what they want. The technology spends that they're spending for you are one little line item on that. One tiny little line item is like, you're going to use the tools maybe that you need to use to do that. And so when you think about it that way, from a pricing and packaging, it just becomes so powerful. And I think that's why I responded to Josh when I said that, is that like, it might also be pricing and packaging more than necessarily category, where it's the shifting landscape of how people are thinking about how they're spending their money, which doesn't necessarily necessitate a new category, but it necessitates a different pricing and packaging and positioning about what you're doing. And so that's so if for entrepreneurs who are listening to it, just noticing if that shift is happening in a particular industry or a particular domain that you have experience in, there's like a ton of opportunity to, like, consulting to product is one of the hardest things to do. And a lot of people fail doing that. They build a consultancy and then they try to productize the product that they've built internally. I think that AI actually shifts the equation from both the internal product building side of it to the external consumption side of it, where it becomes a new, like a potentially interesting opportunity for people that didn't exist before.
Do you have any ideas or kind of like spaces where you're like, ooh, like that'd be a cool place to go try that model?
I think that anyone who is doing like large scale tool implementations that also involved kind of the social aspects of working within the company, similar to what we're doing, I can just say that this is something that's been really powerful and we're noticing it for what we do. But if you abstract it out and you think that the problem is basically something involves tools, some element of consulting, understanding the company, some amount of building that happens that goes with it, but there's a leave behind. Like, you want to, just to give you a very generic example, if you're a consultant and you give high value, like consulting by sitting in on, let's say, product reviews or another type of ritual within the company, your ability to create a tool that then augments your consulting, that lets you spend most of your time on your high leverage consulting and the least amount of time on the low leverage consulting. You actually now can, and you started to see this before with consultancies where they would drop coda into a customer to be able to arrange the customer arrangement. But now you can build like purpose-built things that the company can use and you benefit from and you interact with. So you become like a mix of a SaaS product. One of our things at .work is solutions, not subscriptions. That's how we think about it. You want a solution, you don't want a subscription. No one goes home and says, oh, it was amazing, I have 1,000 subs of this great product. Do they do it? They say, I have got something out of it. I have a solution to be able to work with it. So you could abstract that to different areas of consulting and tooling, or let's say you have a profound knowledge of a certain niche industry like automotive, or you've been doing something, your ability now to build a small vertical SaaS solution that extends your consulting to all the companies you work with, that shifts some of the revenue from like the pay per your hour to pay for access to software and your intelligence through like agents and other things that you build. That's really powerful right now.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind too is Ben, like for example, like you have your course where you teach about interviewing, but you also have an AI co-pilot that you sell on the side.
I was just thinking about the co-pilot.
Yeah. How's that going? Yeah. Tell us about it.
So back in December, we had Tal Raviv on the podcast, and Tal was singing the praises of Claude projects. And I had never played with Claude projects until that point, and ChatGPT did not have projects. So everything I knew about conversations with LLMs was based on just chats and ChatGPT. And then I started playing with Claude projects. And what I found, the first thing I did with it, sometimes you find a toy and it starts as a toy. And it's like, oh, I wonder if I could do this with this toy. And I tried a few different things. Then at some point, I was like, I wonder if this could actually answer the questions that I teach people how to answer in my course, just based on like publicly, just whatever's available to it from all of its training data, with no instructions, no reference files or anything. And it did a really bad job, but it kind of showed that, I mean, one of the things Tal said on our podcast, and I think he said this on Lenny's too, is if you talk with LLMs and they say something that is wrong, you can just ask yourself, have I given it enough context to know that it's wrong? Does it know what I know for why it's wrong? So I started asking myself, what if I fed it more information that would make it not wrong? And it got better really fast. And then I was like, well, it's still off on this. And then I just imagine me repeating that loop, going down that rabbit hole for probably, I don't know, like 30 iterations or something.
Nice.
And what I discovered is that if I gave it a certain level of a certain amount of files and certain very prescriptive amount of instructions, that it actually would be able to tackle a product sense or analytical thinking question. I ended up creating 2 different Claude projects, one for each, with the same level of conversational rigor and flow and content and frameworks as the ones I teach to my students. So I decided to package that set of instructions and files into something that people can buy. And I bundle it as part of my course too. But yeah, that is a way of taking my knowledge and my expertise and turning it into a solution, to your point, that people could consume without a subscription or anything like that. And the fact that the way I've assembled that offering and packaged it will feel barbaric, I think, in probably 6 months, 3 to 6 months. I think we will look back and be like, oh, can you believe that that's how we had to do it, to put it in someone's hands? Because I basically give them a Word doc that has links to like files and instructions, and then they have to go pay for Claude Pro and set up a project and copy paste stuff.
Amazing. Yeah.
So I think there's a connection between something I've been thinking about in that context, and I think something that you're thinking about, which is this idea of almost like portable context that you could share and distribute and sell. Imagine a world in which there's like a certain brain that I could rent or a brain that I could buy, and I could do stuff with it. I can engage with it for a period or for a time. And that brain continually gets updates. And maybe if I don't buy the updates, I don't get the latest version of that brain. But today, the way this stuff works is very siloed. Like I talk to people that use Claude projects and they've got 5 projects for work. And I'm like, how do you ensure that all of the projects have the same updated amount of context about the overarching company stuff, right? Like the things that are a level above the specific project, and no one has a solution for that. And it sounds like you guys are thinking about maybe ways of establishing
when you build a knowledge graph, and I mean, there's a sort of ontologies and knowledge graphs are different. And I didn't know this stuff before, but like ontologies describe the sort of connections of concepts and ideas and things. And the knowledge graph is like an instantiation of that. In some ways, it's like the connection of the knowledge that you know about those things, which is an interesting thing. And then you've actually got data schemas and other things underneath, which is like your data representations of that knowledge. If you think about opportunities in your company, you might have 30 fields, but opportunities are connected to other things. Your strategy is connected to other things. And so one of the, back to your point of like pretty fascinating things, and maybe I can find a way to share it with folks, is we've gotten to the point where we can create like basically a synthetic company really quickly, where the synthetic company will have, and it started by accident of me experimenting with it, where I was like, what if I just had ChatGPT describe a company in a page or 2? Okay, they did that. I was like, okay, what if I fed that in and asked for the last investor call? Okay, got that. Okay, what if I fed it in the insights that probably led to that investor call? Okay, got the level of insights. What if I had to identify strategic opportunities based on those insights in the investor call and the company? Okay, it created those. Okay, what would the organizational chart of this company look like that had these things? Suddenly you've got 150 teams and 2,000 person company. Okay, what if I identified the actionable inputs in a driver tree for each of those companies? Just it came up with the capabilities in driver trees. Okay, given that information, how about a roadmap? We have enough now for a roadmap now, don't we? Yes. Okay, it generates the roadmaps for the particular companies. And then what if I run a simulation of a threat? Something happened this quarter that they didn't know about before. How would everyone respond to it? It changes. It changes the new insights and new opportunities and new things. What if I know about teams? Can I then auto tag feedback that's coming in to be routed to the right team? That's easy. Like a lot of people are doing that kind of stuff now. But with that extra context, it becomes really powerful. And it was an iterative experiment, but now I spend a lot of my time using OpenAI's API, just writing in my spare time at night, like writing helper functions to be able to just generate completely synthetic organizations that then, one thing it's good, we've got good demo data. We just put it all over and just support it in our product really easily. But the other thing is you prove out the point of organizational intelligence. And one thing that's fascinating to me is that so much of the data in companies is not structured data. It's like the docs, the decks, the things. And of course, you have a thing where you say, like, well, let me list some insights, and it's a bulleted list. And that's fine. It's actually really good to collaborate that way. But at a certain point, those things get lost. There's no representation. The ontology of how the company is set up doesn't help you know where to put that stuff. But when you have an ontology, it helps you create the knowledge connections you need for AI to know what it needs to do. Like calling something an insight is the way to start to bootstrap AI to know that there's an insight to find there and knows what to do with it. So it's really fascinating. It's consumed. I'm obsessed with this, how funny and crazy it is that you can create a 2,000 person company that looks and breathes and feels like a company represented in a tool. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it sounded like, I remember you shared one via Slack, and it was like, it felt so real. Like the VP of product was thinking about AI.
It's the early stage of that. And I've taken that a lot further than that, which is really crazy, to do that.
But it felt very real.
I was just picturing you kind of like really maxing out the hallucination features of
well, you do realize also the massive limitations of it. I don't know if you saw what I posted on LinkedIn recently, but in a latest exercise of creating different synthetic companies, I just said a short prompt like tech company, and all like 90% of the companies were founded in 2015, 16, or 17.
Wow.
And I couldn't shake the problem. No matter how much I prompted it and said, and the problem, and you know this too, probably Ben, was like the more prompt you add, sometimes the worse it gets sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you're not letting it draw the connections it was. So I got into a point where, because I kept adding the word insight and collaboration, every company was an insights company. I was like, why is it an insights company? And I'm like trying to debug why it's an insights company. And it's because I like overloaded the prompt with words that had to do with insights. So I basically ended up with 150 companies that were all insights providers founded in 2015, 16, and 17 without saying anything of the sort. So you do also learn the like high hallucination thing.
Obviously, creating demo data is fantastic. And I think, LLMs are great at creating demo data. I love the idea of running simulations on things, not because the simulations are going to be accurate, but because what a fun thing to talk about. Here's a company which looks believable, which you can imagine yourself sitting inside of, and then something happens. How does it work? And then you have this like things to discuss. I guess the thing that would make me most nervous, though, would be taking our synthetic creations too seriously. Like the same risk as doing synthetic user interviews. Like we don't need to talk to real users, right? We can create synthetic users with OpenAI and interview them instead. And it's easier and it's safer, and I don't need to worry as much. I can imagine that being the same risk there. But I'd love to hear more about the running the simulations bit. Like, do people do that?
Yeah, you have to make the model, and I mean, it starts to get to be a pretty big scheme of things, but then you have to introduce, like you basically have to simulate what would happen, and simulate the event, and then go back to the different objects and then start asking them how, given what you know, how would you adapt and how would you do these things? And it creates new objects. So it's just like how word would travel in a company. Like the news is this. How would the team that does the integrations respond to this? And then you actually have to model it changing its roadmap. Or how would the leader, what would the next investor call look like because of this? And then if you simulate that, you can cascade that change through the company, which is exactly what would happen if it was a real company, right?
You know what that's making me It's making me think of how I was talking to a founder in the aerospace, like tooling industry, and basically in very expensive, mechanically heavy spaces, they have these requirements are not just like a PRD for a SaaS product. Like the requirements are like, we need to manufacture certain materials, and then the requirements flow into all kinds of other aspects, and everything has to be the perfect size and the perfect weight. So if any requirements change, they have these very complex systems that map out how the downstream dependent, like which things rely on that exact requirement and what is going to change about them, and modeling all that out. It sounds so kind of, I was picturing that kind of very big system.
Kind of like a cascade of context that you have in the company. And I think that the one thing is that most context, humans are amazingly good recontextualizers. So the ability to go in a company, like the reason why, skip levels and all the escalation paths you have in your company, or your one-on-ones with your boss, or triad meetings where one triad meets with the next triad, we're just incredible at recontextualizing. Like the directors know how to take this information and, in theory, recontextualize it to the audience of the people that they're talking to. And so what you notice, what's really crazy when you build these simulations, is you actually see how I actually could see the effect of the transition effect going from VPs down to the front lines. When it was trying to be pleased and then put good news in both directions, you actually had to prompt it to not try to sugarcoat it for your boss. And so the simulation just proved that why the front lines escalation of the fire burning eventually reaches their boss, which is like some issues potentially. I'm not joking, which is crazy about it. So that's what I've been really into using AI for, is not so much like the synthetic stuff doesn't feel, it feels interesting, but that's almost feels like a bit of a parlor trick to me. Like it is interesting, but when you know how it works, you know the parlor trick. But to me, it's like creating simulations. So another thing we did recently is I generated 30 startups or 30 startup-ish companies, and then generated 5 initiatives they were working on per 30. And then I analyzed those based on things like iteration friendliness, the batch size. And one thing that was super fascinating about it, again, back to weird biases, I had one thing on called like executive support. And AI gave, out of all the variances, no matter the different shapes of work, it could be the riskiest internal platform project, or it could be the most high profile front end project. It ranked everything with high executive support. And yet the variance for things like how long it would take was really broad. And you started to be able to see these, you could run like a k-means analysis on this. And that was fascinating back to simulations, because I realized from there that companies talk about, well, we work this way, this is our process, but there's so many different shapes of work. Some things are iteration friendly, customer facing. Some things are actually very internal, but you can move very quickly because they're internal and no one will notice. Some things are huge migrations. They're going to be a pain in the ass no matter what you do. So these are different shapes of work. But my point is, like, AI as like a thought partner to run simulations on human dynamics and social dynamics and like organizational behavior to build a working theory. You're going to throw away what AI came up with, but you're going to build like a working theory or validate social dynamics that you thought existed, like how information travels up and down in an org. So this is like my pastime now. It's marginally related to work. We're building a knowledge graph and stuff, and it's good for demo data, but it's also fascinating from a kind of research standpoint.
I feel like if that was a product, I would buy it, and I would encourage every organization to buy it. Like, I just feel like just from a manager and leadership, like education of like be able to simulate and understand, hey, here, like even when you do a reorg, like here are the consequences of it, or when you're like communicating, or when you're trying to figure out, hey, like how do I want to make sure what's the most effective way to share this information or this news or onboarding someone, right? Adding someone to the picture.
I think if you could almost like if every employee at the company was a well-established character, almost like if you're reading a really good book or watching a really good movie and everyone's got like a backstory and a personality and the characters are really good. If you could seed a company that has these really well thought out characters, then play out, to your point, these simulations. There's like a Slack channel with 10 PMs. They just announced a new VP of product joined. Here's their product, like simulate what the side chatter is going to be in the PM Slack channel when that person gets joined. Like, what might they be talking about?
It's pretty, and it's not far from that. You could, the funny thing is you can simulate in both directions to different effect. You can start with an investor call it's well trained on investor calls. So it's really good to come up with an accurate investor call, somewhat a representative investor call. Not that investor calls, they are not accurate, but they sound accurate, but it simulates the inaccurate investor calls that actually exist that aren't just, I mean, the numbers maybe are correct.
I mean, that's just Wall Street. That's just Wall Street summarized
Wall Street
for you.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it is funny to come from different angles, but you can also go from the bottom up. You can say, you've got this team, would this team have 5 people on it? And then give those people personas to think about it. So it is pretty, but again, I think in like 3 years, we'll look at all this stuff and it will just seem so like a toy, but we'll be able to create these simulations for social. They're already doing it in sociology and behavioral sciences. That's like Ethan Mollick and other people talk about that, where they're creating experiments that at least provide a theoretical basis for what should be happening when humans are doing something. So it's pretty wild stuff, I think.
Yeah. I think it's like similar, like digital twins is the same thing, right? It's like you can run yourself in different simulations and see what happens and how you react to different things. The one thing that I want to make sure we touch on that I'm excited to hear your point of view, John, too, is like we've had multiple conversations in the podcast where, hey, like we're seeing like these PMs and design team start their work in Bold instead of Figma. And definitely people are like, wait, like I haven't seen that. And it sounds like you've seen pretty like pricing like companies that are working in a very unique or advanced way, given how early we are in like maybe using these tools like Cursor or prototyping tools. I'm curious, like, what are some interesting things that you're seeing of how people are leveraging these new tools?
I might be seeing a kind of biased view that I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of operations people. So I think but that is an example, like I've done a ton of these calls and it's a non-trivial number of these people, which are like, now my product ops team can do minor integrations. And so I think, okay, so that's one theme where when things have well-published APIs and you're just munging the stuff and it's non-mission critical, if it breaks, it's not like your customers are going to notice. Perfect candidate for these sort of internal tools. If you were doing it with a spreadsheet before and then like manually joining stuff to get to another thing, you can now do it easily, or at least you can, at least enough to know what's happening. So I saw that. I probably wouldn't know. I know internally, it's like just build a prototype first. Just use Cursor, build a prototype. This is also part of the platform product thing, which I think is fascinating. I think the thing that changes the game with a platform product is the platform product. This is a fascinating thing, and maybe Josh or whoever will appreciate it. But take like a product like Airtable. Now, from the user's perspective, or Notion or whatever, from the user, or Asana, you heard Asana. So from the user's perspective, there's a certain level of abstraction. You can do certain things with the product. You can work with tables, you can connect tables or whatever. That means almost by definition, if you go one level removed back into Asana or back into Airtable, they are not architecting a multi-tenant application as simple as the mental model users have it. You will always be one level or more of abstraction higher. So they will have, Asana has or whatever, or Airtable has a field object or a thing object at some point. But even then, their customer-facing teams probably don't use the thing object. They probably use some abstraction above that. Go one further deep into Airtable, and you have someone who's been like, it's all a thing. And it's funny, internally, we had a funny demo where we start with the deepest level of abstraction. So like one field literally has this graph of 9 related objects. And we went one level of abstraction up. It's an object with fields. Then you go one object level up, and it's like a dot, a node, right? You go one level up, and it's like the interface, and it does this. Now, the reason why this relates to AI and like what AI can do and can't do is that the deeper the level of abstraction, just the more complex and the more brain work involved with a deeper level of abstraction. So if you look at your I did a funny post the other day on LinkedIn where I compared like doing something in a spreadsheet versus building a multi-tenant application to do the thing that you just did in a spreadsheet goes from 6 tables or 6 tabs of a spreadsheet to over 300, just not even getting into the application code, to 300 objects or more in that system. You've got to keep logs, you've got to keep version logs, you've got to understand tenancy, you've got to understand these things. Anyway, this is the amazing thing that I think a lot of people don't, unless you're maybe engineers get it, and maybe the general public or like the me's didn't get it as deeply as I did in the last couple of weeks because we have a platform product, is humans are great at those higher levels of abstraction and those underlying architecting those systems so that they work. When you do that correctly, and you offer it up through MPCs or whatever you're going to do to that next layer of abstraction up, and you architect those systems well, they can just go crazy with it. And so you start to see, so for example, the other day I met someone who their company was using Airtable extensively, but then now their team I felt limited by Airtable. The level of abstraction was just to be a front end builder. But now with Replit, I can build internal tools on top of Snowflake or whatever that I'm building the data off of, or some other data, or Replit has just native data stores that you can integrate with. They're like, why would I use an Airtable? Because I can build the app. So it's allowing people who normally couldn't get down to that level of abstraction ways to have access to it. But if you're a real super nerd about engineering, now's the best time ever to tackle really complex architectural problems that no one would want to touch. And another one Josh would appreciate is just time, for example. All these products like Asana, everything have to deal with time. Time is a really hard problem. You actually have to create graphs of what a day is. What's a day? What's a day in any other country? Then you have to be what's a week, what's a month? And it's a graph. And because in these charts, you have to be able to apply things to time. It seems like a trivial problem. Start date, end date. What could be so wrong? But when you build these systems in a really deep way, it's totally, anyone who's, and as Mark nodded, like anyone who's built these systems know it's not an easy problem. In fact, on that level. And so that's an example of like, it's also a big opportunity for people who've craved building platforms for deep areas of knowledge they know about architecturally or otherwise. It also presents huge opportunities to let people then build on these levels of abstraction that work for them. It's fascinating at time.
Okay, that was so interesting to hear you say that Replit tools like it present an opportunity for people who think in abstraction. That's always been my biggest frustration with these tools. And these are the things that make them feel so far more like toys, not in the pejorative sense, but in the building small little featured products, is because, again, my experience is the moment you say, okay, now let's add authentication. Now let's add user roles. Now let's add logging. I've mastered authentication in Replit. I feel very proud of myself. I have yet to get logging to work successfully. The things that are like the basics of abstract enterprise systems like Notion or like Airtable or Coda are the things that stop it. And the things that, work really well is, I have a mental model for how all these pieces of data or information interact with each other. I can express that. But if I want to generalize it or abstract it up one level.
And that's what I think is a huge opportunity. That's what I meant is one way to see this current climate is don't be building down in the details. Don't do that because Replit's going to do this. But another way to look at this is, no, you're not going to solve, like when I use Cursor, basically the more trouble I get into is when I need to actually think on any level of abstraction, like any type of architecture type thing. And I'm showing my screen now for anyone if we're listening, but this was the image that I created where this is a basic relational spreadsheet. This is to create it, and Mark will love it. This is just to create, this is the app. Milestone, 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 goal, project, subtask, subtask, subtask. Okay, basic spreadsheet, relational with some dependencies, a temporal version of the software, a somewhat flexible graph-aware version of the software, and then a multi-tenant version of the software. And this is what this one is basically. But to your point, it keeps going. To your point, that's like such an opportunity for builders and stuff to think about. They're not going to solve that problem. You're not going to solve the problem of time in Replit.
So let me ask you a question, and I'm curious, Ben, as well, for all the clients you're working with too. My old friend from elementary school, Gil Dimner, who's a VC in London, Israel right now, wrote a piece last week, 2 weeks ago maybe, about what if AI were your best customer. And it's talking about platforms that are building interoperability, MCP, whatever, in so that people can more easily build either toy applications or real applications. Toy applications being asking questions in OpenAI or something like that. Real applications maybe being something you build in Replit and being able to ingest information and act on that information in a native way. So what I'm curious about is like, is this a thing, John, which you're thinking about in terms of Dotworks' actual roadmap? And Ben, is this something that, I'm not naming any of your clients, is this something that clients are starting to think about? Okay, in a world where everybody's building their own little toy application, what is the role of my larger platform product going to be?
Yeah, that's what the whole gig's about for us. which is, and it's in fact why we haven't thought of our product as a no-code tool or anything like that. We don't know what the future will look like. So we're not over optimizing. We don't want to do a product-led motion. Like we're not going to optimize about someone being able to come in and just get it all going themselves, because we don't know what getting it going yourself will mean in the next year, 2 or 3, as we're doing it. So when we think about it, we think about like, there could be a day where people primarily use .work because we're really good at abstracting like the 10 hardest problems of this: time, hierarchies, all the normal auth stuff, which aren't even the hard problems. So like those problems will be solved. Not like knowledge graph oriented things, which can be difficult. There's probably 10 of those problems that are deeper architectural problems that you'll never want people. So there's a future of something like .work where, yeah, we have the building blocks, but like people are just using Replit to build whatever app they want on top of .work, because we abstract out a lot of the harder problems to make that work, to make something graph aware. And if you look at all the productivity tools, it was a huge release in Airtable to just allow you to go 3 levels of hierarchy deep in a view and add a grouping. And that's the limitation, because if you're Airtable and maybe you can't extend that level of abstraction out any further, otherwise it's not going to be usable. And it's like Asana would be the same thing, like behind the scenes, Rike, Asana, all these products are like app builder type products that have a lot of abstraction to do it because they're multi-tenant things. But yeah, there is a future, I think, we're thinking about that a lot. But yeah, passing over to Ben.
Do you,
or Mark?
One quick question there. Do you see developers as a persona yet? And like, when do you think, what would need to happen for you to see developers as like someone who's, okay, they're going to be
I
user?
think this changes the game. Back to Josh's point, AI is the customer. So who's going to be using AI to build on top of your product?
And you think it's going to be the ops
everyone,
person?
it just expands the number of personas of developers. It's almost like we've taken the normal personas of developers of like junior front end developer up to experienced architect, and we've added this whole other set of people like super experienced architect, super experienced 20 years ago developers who haven't touched code in 20 years. That's a new, like that's a persona. Now they're touching code. The vibe coding product ops manager, that's like another developer persona. And they are the input, they are the interactor. So they're the persona, but AI is the customer, right?
Yeah.
Like the output of AI is what they're essentially thinking that it's going to make them effective at what they're doing. So I think that's just, I don't know how any of this is going to pan out, but it's a fascinating.
But it's almost like it's not worth,
about it.
It's like not worth building APIs basically right now until you get more clarity of like where the field is going basically.
Yeah, where you're doing. But I think about your app, I think what's the most fascinating part is SaaS is fundamentally limited by increases in complexity and the available market and stuff like that. But the reason why once like Asana gets to be a certain age, or every SaaS company I've been to be a certain age, just starts slowing down, especially if they're in vertical, if they're in highly horizontal SaaS or in highly vertical SaaS, you just start, it was at Toast, it was Amplitude everywhere. Like you just start accumulating complexity. You start accumulating complexity in your go-to-market motions, your tech stack, or your organization, and all those things. And then one could see that, and you never access the long tail. The reason why there's a million note-taking apps and then only 5 big note-taking apps is because humans love note-taking apps in their own way, but there's only so much money, which the big people make, but still there's enough money that 1,000 people have made note-taking apps. So it opens up the world of possibilities if you think about it. What if your average SaaS product is really good at getting you the 80% of the way there, and anyone can get their next 20% of the way there for their company? It changes the physics of SaaS, which is why people are freaked out. They're freaked out because these companies invested extremely heavily in one way of their company working, and now have found out that if they had been 3 years old now, they would have built their company in a completely different way. But if you're a near public or recently public SaaS company, you have invested incredible amounts of money in SaaS working in a certain way, which it may not work that way in the years to come. That's why the industry's freaking out, I think, and the valuations represent that, I think.
I think the other thing too is just, it's not just that you invested in how an app is supposed to work, but also the way people work and the way people think. And I think that's actually the part that's really hard to change. Kind of like thinking from first principles, like everything we knew, we have to scratch it. I think I've seen that up close from some people that work in those companies.
But I think that's an argument in favor actually of the strategy I think you guys are taking right now, John, which is this idea of building a highly configurable system, because when your system is not overly opinionated and you can allow people to operate the way that they want to operate within your system because the Lego blocks are all there and they're aware of them, then theoretically, as people's behavior changes, you're less trying to like change their behavior to meet you where you are, and you're more educating them on the ways that their desired behaviors can be realized and come into fruition and
kind of
in the
amazing
product,
when
right?
you think about that. And it's so, this is why I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot of things definitely to be a little bit bummed out about recently, but it does open up this whole other potential way businesses could work. And the idea that people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for what I call like the best worst product, or you're spending a ton of money for like, this is why the SaaS product pricing has just become so weird. You talk to people internally and they're like, oh, I'm just so sick of spending $150K for something that doesn't actually work how we want it to work. Like we still have to spend $300,000 of internal workarounds. Like when you think that annual planning costs $10 million, like people are, I still use spreadsheets for half the stuff anyway. Or, oh no, that's not in Asana, or that's not in .work, or that's not wherever. It's crazy. Yeah, just when you think about what could it be like if the products you use had the last mile of
you as a user.
And this, it is kind of interesting.
I don't know if you listened to if you watched the recent conversation on Lenny's where he had Ivan Zhao, the founder of Notion, on as a guest.
Oh, cool.
And it was a really interesting conversation. And the relevance to what we're talking about is that Notion has always, sometimes did it well, sometimes did it worse along the way. But the entire time they've been trying to build the product that is almost like infinitely configurable. And a lot of people didn't know what to do with it because it could do all these things. And now it's, like these people are using us for these use cases we never really built for, like specifically, like it's not a vertical use case that's opinionated, but it turns out that vertical is deciding, like this whole space has just coalesced around the best way to do what we do is in Notion, right? And like these other spaces do the same exact thing, but they've built this product that is so configurable that it can be intimidating in a way, because there's like some people show up when there's a trillion Lego blocks laying around and get really excited. And some people show up when there's a trillion Lego blocks laying around feeling, I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed. So I think there's like, not everyone is equally drawn to
configurability,
the same points on the opinionated scale.
Partners and other things. We think a lot, for example, for .work, we think there's going to be a lot of people that just want partners to help them. Back to those 4 hats. Most companies don't have a skilled ways of working designer or operating system designer internally. So just setting them free on .work might not be great, but I'm learning one area that AI is not going to replace anytime soon, because it's a very highly human activity, is the idea of consulting with companies. So you have these partners that have 20 customers, big companies or big enterprises they're doing consulting for, but the ability for them to drop a white label version of their OS into each of their clients and do that is one thing. But the other thing, what you mentioned is, I think it's what you think of the Lego blocks. Like, I love Notion, I love Airtable, I love Coda, I really love those products, but they are flexible in a very wide way within a predetermined box of tables. And you see how much work they've had to put into that. Just, I'm sure that at Asana, and I know at Coda was this way, like it seems trivial. Like, why don't we just allow table nesting? Wouldn't that be great? Why don't we just have table nesting? You can have nesting of those things. And I have a friend at Airtable, and it was like, John, you have to remember that N%, and it was a very high percent of the people in the company in engineering, are just concerned with this thing operating, just working, just not falling, not because it's an ill-designed product, but even when you have a great product, just keeping it stable and performant and working well, when you have this configurable multi-tenant type app builder type thing, is a really hard problem. So it's a really interesting thing. But then the question becomes like, wow, is that just some physics of the industry? Or is there a potential even for that to change as you get to like even more abstract platforms? Could that allow people build even more full-featured apps and interfaces into their products or their internal products that don't just feel like CRUD on top of tables, which is fundamentally what most of these apps feel like.
What are you saying, Josh?
I'm saying that there's nothing new here, right? The biggest competitor to .work today is probably spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets. That's what I said to someone the other day.
Yeah, right. Spreadsheets are a drawing tool for tables. They're a database for, right? They're all these. Notion is just a better spreadsheet. And Coda is just a better spreadsheet. And Airtable is certainly just a better spreadsheet. This is the kind of constant tension between completely general.
Better is subjective here, though. Like I think there's certain applications that I would prefer a spreadsheet to.
I'm learning about that a lot. One thing that's fascinating is I'm learning to love more about spreadsheets and docs and stuff. Like when you realize the problem, spreadsheets are great. They're really flexible. They're really accessible. They don't toolify what you're doing, which is the benefit of spreadsheets. Like when you sit in front of blank slate, in front of Coda or Notion or whatever, and you start going to town. In fact, this is going to sound funny. I have a problem with my own product at work because when I sit down in front of the product, I'm so excited. I just start building. And then I turn around in 2 hours and I'm like, oh my God, what the hell did I just do? Let me go back to Miro and just make sure about so we talk a lot about like, when we deal with our early design partners, we deal all with what their rituals are. Who are the humans? How are they interacting? And what are they doing? And they're like, shouldn't we start building? I want to have opportunities in my product. And I'm like, look, opportunities is not a thing. That is a word you use to describe something that you think how it operates in the product. Like the opportunity solution tree is a model for teaching. It's not a thing. It's not like something you need to operationalize. What are you doing? They're like, oh, we do product reviews. What do you need for your product reviews to be awesome? We need to look at the metrics and we need to maybe look at a list of our current bets. Okay, great. Let's like start there. So it's funny, like just because you can build shouldn't be that you build, right? To do these things. So you just reminded me of that funny problem. Let's do it.
Yeah. I know we're coming up against time. Yeah. This was really fun. I completely lost track of time, I'll be honest. But I think this is probably as good a place to wrap as any. John, Josh, how can our audience continue to learn more about you in case they haven't heard our previous episodes? And is there anything they can do to be helpful? John, you want to go first? Or Josh, you want to go first? Yeah.
You can find me at jhm.lol. Learn more about me and about my coaching, mentorship, and advisory practice for startups, founders, solo product managers, first-time heads of product. I really enjoy that work, and I love talking to and learning from my clients. Maybe that could be you.
LinkedIn is probably... It's just very, I was about to say LinkedIn to do these things. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is a decent thing. Or yeah, I'm like in heavy operator mode at the moment. So I'm being very bad about getting back to people who aren't necessarily people I need to talk to try to close deals. To do things.
So maybe that's how people can be helpful.
Maybe they can be helpful for this call. I don't think I've ever said it on a podcast, but be helpful if you want to nerd out about the stuff I talked about. I'd be doing research every day, or if you just want to buy what I'm selling, and then I'm willing to jump into that mode to do those things.
How will people know if their organization is a good fit, potentially?
There are some signals that we've observed. Like one is definitely you show up at these major expensive rituals in your company, and the startup costs of just getting context are super high. You never have any output from the activities. You come up with decks that have your strategy in it, but there's no way to really link to the strategy. You can't mention that you're lining up your roadmap around that strategy. So I'd say that's usually the best sign that the time and investment you spend in trying to make sense of things with your coworkers does not feel well spent. And that's something we can help with.
Love it.
Is everyone raising their hand in the audience? I don't know. Yeah,
I think they are. And I know a bunch of people that have worked with Josh as a coach. They only have the best things to say. And also working with John is a great mind when it comes to organization design and all this stuff. Everyone will be lucky to work with them. Yeah, with that, I think it's a wrap. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. All right, thanks. Yeah, talk to y'all soon.
See ya.